To tell the story of Gannon Buhr this season, we have to start right at the beginning. In what feels like a lifetime ago, Gannon Buhr took Drew Gibson 4 holes deep into a playoff at the Las Vegas Challenge, only to lose by inches in one of the more heartbreaking losses of the season. But what a season it has been for the kid from Iowa. When he missed his putt in the playoff and he stood there, fighting tears, and he had his head in his hands, I knew that he would be back, right? We all did. His talent has been apparent since he broke onto the scene, but little did I know how consistent Gannon would prove to be over the course of 2022. I'm Mason with Heiser Flight. Thank you so much for being here. Please consider subscribing if you enjoy this type of content. So Gannon's season this year, I think, flew slightly under the radar in some ways because he never had that big win to really cap off a weekend until now. Gannon this year has 13 top 10 finishes, the second most behind Paul McBeth. He has 16 top 25 finishes, which is tied with McBeth and Wysocki for the most. He has the highest average event finish out of anyone at 7.94. He's second on the season in Circle 2 putting at 37%. He has a Silver Series title, now a major title. He's the youngest player to ever win USDGC. And there was one more thing. What was it? Oh yeah, that's right. He's 17 years old. That is unfathomable. We've seen a lot of young players emerge in these recent years, but none of them as skilled or prodigious as Gannon Buhr. None. And I'm not going to make, some hot take about what his career could potentially look like, calling him the next Paul McBeth or something, but there is no limit to his ceiling if he continues to improve at this rate. Everything else that can be said about Gannon has already been said, but I want to highlight a few things that I've noticed recently that were on full display at USDGC. The first is that Gannon Buhr has that it factor. He is a competitor through and through, and when the moment rises, Gannon seems to rise with it. Remember that is a rarity, especially in someone so young and inexperienced, and he did not back down when the moment became larger than himself. I mean, really, he did the opposite, putting like a madman from Circle 2, draining clutch putt after putt to tie the course record and to win a major title at the age of 17. Something else we see in younger players is that they're typically missing certain facets of their game. The longer you play, the more well-rounded you become, the more you round out your weaknesses. They'll have a great sidearm, but a below-average backhand, or they'll have a world-class distance throw, but a shaky putt. Gannon Buhr, at such a young point in his career, has nearly every shot in the bag and can execute them at the highest of levels. Barring injury or mental setback, Gannon will only become even more well-rounded playing at the highest levels on both wooded and open courses, as he proved he can do this year. The Buhr era is upon us because that kid is ice cold.
Yeah! Unbelievable stuff from the 17-year-old. Gannon Buhr. Ice in his veins, Philo.
So let's take a step back and kind of look at the tournament in general. There's a lot to be said about Winthrop Gold as a course, its legacy, its history, some will say its gimmicks. But despite whatever you believe about the course, it does the most important thing right. It produces exciting disc golf. We got to watch Ricky Wysocki take the reins in the early rounds. We were introduced to the fearless Jake Mon, another 17-year-old with heaps of talent. Bradley Williams made a push, but ultimately at a course like Winthrop, the final round is all that'll be remembered with the stroke swings that can happen there. And the final round boiled down to a 4-horse race with the lead card all having a several stroke gap on the field. It was setting up for an unbelievably exciting final day between Paul McBeth, Calvin Heimburg, Niklas Antilla, and Gannon Buhr. My initial expectation when looking at these 4 heading into Championship Sunday was that the veterans would probably pull away, right? Gannon and Niklas both have competed for wins, but none as big as this, especially on a course like Winthrop, where mental game plays more of a role than almost any other course in the world. But as we know, what happened in actuality was the opposite. Gannon and Niklas pulled away while Calvin and Paul fell behind. I'm not concerned about Paul McBeth, but what he proved this week in South Carolina was that he is human. After a frankly, to his standards, horrible first round, Paul McBeth surged in rounds 2 and 3, and after what happened at Worlds, I almost didn't see a way that Paul McBeth wouldn't take it down. But his game was just slightly off, and he couldn't clutch himself out of it this time. Calvin Heimberg, on the other hand, and it pains me to say this, I think has developed a bit of a narrative for struggling to close it out in the final rounds of majors. I won't call it, a choke, because Calvin had one bad hole and otherwise continued to surge to close out the final round. Calvin's near the top of the list for overdue major winners, and we'll have to keep a closer eye on this narrative and how it unravels next year. Of course, I have to talk about the young Finn, Niklas Antilla. I said in my very last video that these young Europeans like Niklas and Linus Karlsson with more experience will become genuine threats for titles come 2023. Well, it didn't even take that long. Niklas was in it every single step of the way, and besides a few errant putts in the final round, he played some of the cleanest disc golf at a major I've ever seen. His play style is characterized by this very smooth and intelligent consistency. He plays with a lot of mental maturity, never biting off too much, but always just enough to gain strokes on the field. It was really, really impressive to watch him this weekend. Like Gannon, at such a young age, Niklas already has so many shots in the bag, and I was really impressed with his roller game specifically this weekend. While we got to watch Ricky Wysocki dominate in many of the Elite Series events this year, and we watched Paul McBeth excel in the high-pressure situations of majors, USDGC was kind of poetic this year. It was a showcase of the next generation of disc golf on one of disc golf's most historic courses. The future is so bright. The Tour Championship is next. I cannot wait to see how the final event of the season shapes up. On a personal note, I have some really exciting news for the future of this content coming up as well. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next one.